everyone for joining us here today. We are doing another episode of the Sales Development Mastermind series with Mr. Joe Payne, and this is your host, David Dulany. I thank you, everyone, for joining us. Joe, we're talking about a huge problem that people are facing every day in the sales development world. You're facing it as a marketer, and just in general, it sucks. It slows everything down. Your data sucks. Now what do we do?
Well, I mean, most people will throw up their hands and cry, but there's a lot of different things people can do to actually fix their data stack. But I really think that the beginning of the problem comes down to how people have built their data stack, where their data comes from, and really how they're looking at their data on a day-to-day basis when it comes to what departments or organizations inside of the company are actually using that data. So yeah, and there we go.
Exactly. And I want to dive in. It seems like we've got all these data tools. People are trying to figure out how to improve their data on a daily basis. But, how did we get to this point where there are all these tools and we have all these solutions, but we still have a ways to go in order to have clean, repeatable data that really helps us? So how did we get here? What are the issues that we're facing? And now that we know what the current state is, what do we do moving forward? So the first thing I want to know, really, how did we get to this point? Okay. If you look at the Scott Brinker slide, there's a ton of point solutions that are out there. There seem to be more and more sprouting up every day. And you broke out just within the data set of the point solutions. There's a lot of people trying to solve this problem as well. So tell us a little bit about, this huge number of people trying to solve the same problem and, how we got to this point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that, if you look at the evolution of the Scott Brinker slide, back when it started in, I think it was about 2011, there were only 150 companies on that slide. And now we're looking at 5,000 companies. And then on the data slide alone, I mean, we have a couple hundred companies right here. But I really think the evolution of all of this came from a very select few number of data providers that are actually still around today. I mean, I think that, Dun & Bradstreet, Info Group, Hoovers, which is now part of Dun & Bradstreet, Sales Genie, which was bought by Info Group, these companies have been around for a very long time. And D&B, for example, I mean, they've been around for 177 years, since 1841. So it's they are an ancient data provider. And, if you were to call any company a dinosaur, they actually deserve that title. It's almost honorific at this point. But also going back to that data slide, I mean, you're also seeing a massive amount of consolidation in this data stack, with Rain King merging with Discover.org, with Hoovers being bought by D&B, with Avention also being bought. Same thing goes with Net Prospects. And it's really an interesting time right now in the data space, just due to all this consolidation. I mean, also like ZoomInfo being bought by private equity, and then it's just, it's an open market for companies that have tried to make it work for a long time and then being scooped up by some of these larger players.
Yeah. And definitely, and you mentioned something interesting in that a lot of the newer companies that are coming on the scene are getting their initial data set from some of these older ones. So it's basically a lot of the same data just being sort of sliced and diced in different ways. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say there's only a couple different ways where there's a truly unique and original source of data out there. I mean, if you look at D&B, for example, if you create a business in America, you have to have a DUNS number. So they're part of the federal government itself, which is a great little monopoly they have there. So they're getting all of this new business data all the time. Info Group, they're connected to city, county, and state government filings. So whenever a new business is incorporated, Info Group is in the know. Same thing goes with, utility or gas hookups, or someone goes to the USPS and requests a new business address. These are all sources for data that flow into these companies that harvest it and then resell it out there. I think another thing too is that other companies are trying to figure out new and more interesting ways to gather B2B data. So if you look at, companies like ZoomInfo or Clearbit, their primary source of data is actually, you're looking at Chrome extensions, scraping and taking all of your contacts from your email address provider, or, a constant contact that's basically giving away a free address book and then taking all the contacts that are uploaded into it. Very dubious legal ramifications there potentially down the line, but these are ways where data is really harvested. And I would say the final capstone of that is, going after business profiles on social media websites. I mean, like Yelp, Facebook Places, Google Places, where business owners are really encouraged to maintain strong and healthy profiles. That's an incredible source of data that has created a pretty big baseline for the whole industry out there. So if someone says, oh, I create my own data set, be wary of that because it comes from somewhere. There's always a source. Just dot your I's and cross your T's when it comes to that origination point.
Okay, so now we kind of understand where they came from. And as you look at, the clean data sources that you found, these are a few of the characteristics that are completely unique to each company. So I think when I think about data, you start with it's like the water analogy. You start with sort of a dirty cup of water, and that's from sort of the historic data sources. And each of the new vendors that are coming out sort of clean it down to a certain point where you finally have water that you can actually drink. And, as you point out here, each company is unique in how they sort of clean that data and make it usable for their teams. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that every company really is unique when it comes to their ideal customer profile, who they're trying to sell to, what that really looks like from not only a company and account perspective, but also a contact perspective. When someone goes out and buys another data source, I mean, what they're really doing though is buying a vendor that sells to everyone else. And those vendors, it's a one-to-many situation. Like if you look at, any data provider out there, they're trying to be a catch-all for every industry and everybody on the market, which makes it very difficult if someone has a unique customer profile that kind of goes outside of standard market norms, which is, oh, Fortune 1000 and IT director is cool. Got me covered. Trying to sell anything else, maybe it's a lot harder.
Yeah, and this kind of makes sense now for your average, sales development rep or even the sales development manager. Data is such the foundational piece of your strategy, because you have to be able to contact people and you got to be able to email them in order to talk about their problems and be able to set an appointment. But now it all kind of makes sense of why you go into your average database at your company and, your data sucks because, you're getting basically the kind of muddy water from all these different sources that do not necessarily go to your ideal customer profile. They're not necessarily a single source of truth because it might just be from one. You don't have alignment. You've got marketing, entering inbound leads that might not be a good fit. And we haven't really had that human element yet. So you end up where most people on the call would understand, with a lot of dirty data in your system, basically.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that one of the biggest things out there too is that, every department now almost has their own different data stack and different data sources, which muddies the water even more. And, you have marketing that's looking at Clearbit, and then you have sales that's looking at ZoomInfo because they want the direct dials. And then, at the end of the day, you have a revenue or sales ops manager there that's stuck in the middle who wants to, kill himself. He's trying to manage the impossible, which is making sure sales has actionable data while also being able to stay within the parameters of an ideal customer profile that in many situations the average data provider out there can probably not actually fulfill. So it's
Yeah.
between a rock and a hard place there.
No, and you make a really good point as we go into sort of the next question, like what are most people using, and why is it that, you know, still with all these tools we haven't quite made the connection to clean data. One point that you made that's so true is you've got to have some kind of operational person who is I feel really strongly, you know, in charge of how data comes into the system, how long it stays in the system, and how it's removed from the system as well. Because as you point out, there's a lot of different factors that go into creating a clean database for the sales development team. You've got the type, the amount of data that you need, what kind of technology they use, are you scoring the data? You know, is it on the account level and things like that? So you can imagine, to your point, if you don't have someone who's operationally savvy being the sort of one throat to choke on data, you're going to end up with a mess.
Definitely. And I think that I mean, it's getting very muddy as you were describing too, because I mean, people out. I mean, the average tenure of a marketer right now is like 1.6 years. The average tenure for salespeople sometimes is even less than that. So you have people coming into organizations sometimes with their own data or their preferred vendors, and it just adds up over time to being that point where an organization says, I need to abandon my current sales force and get a new one and do that massive switch and get a whole nother instance. I've seen that happen many times before where they just throw up their hands. It's over. It's done. I killed it and I have to get a new one.
Well, I think, and it also depends a lot about, you know, how big your organization is. You know, if you're at a smaller organization and you feel like things are generally under control, then this could just be a consideration. You know, at some point, we're gonna have to put somebody in charge of the operational aspects of these different functions. And if you work at a larger organization, then it's you know, talking to your management team about the data and making sure that it's working correctly. Because yeah, I mean, if you look at some of these different tools, each one of these has to be implemented correctly, monitored, and utilized correctly in order to get you closer to that goal of clean data.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great little outline of, you know, a modern data stack. I mean, if you're looking at your average company today, they're going to use 5 to 6 plus data vendors that cover a gamut of things. So we're talking about, you know, I'm going to use ZoomInfo for phone numbers. I'm going to use Discover.org for more contact and account level data. Use Datanyze for technographics, Leadspace for building up my account list, Everstring to find new accounts, and then Clearbit for general cleansing and enrichment. And I mean, the long and the short of it is that every single one of these data providers has different formatting for all the same fields. Everyone has different values. Like the revenue range on ZoomInfo is going to be different from the revenue range on Leadspace, which is different from Clearbit, which is in itself, from an operational standpoint, a whole nightmare when it comes to, you know, being able to do that appropriate territory routing and matching. But there really is no other way to build a good baseline today without having a collection of sources. There is no one single source of truth out there. And when you have a complicated ICP or you have data needs for your team, like I run an inside sales team and I need phone numbers, ZoomInfo is your source for phone numbers, but everything else in their database could be suspicious when it comes to say, is that person still at that company? But that mobile number is awesome, but they're not there anymore. So it's
Right.
you know, it's trying to figure out what each source is good at, what each source specializes in, and then being able to leverage that as much as possible and combine it together appropriately.
Yeah, and you got to stay on top of all these things. I mean, it's starting to make sense why the data sucks so bad for most of the people that are on the call. In that, we're starting with those dinosaur lead sources that we know that most data providers are kind of sharing the same thing. And then there's a few of the more cutting edge ones that's going into a system that could have 5 or 6 different tools plugged in that's not necessarily being organized correctly. There's sometimes there's not a lot of ownership over the data. A point that you made earlier also is no one's really reporting back on the data to their management. They're just sort of complaining about it around the water cooler. It's created this situation that we're in now.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, and I love this graphic that you sent over, in that, we had the promise of all these robots that were going to come and help us and make us completely organized. All we had to do is pop in the silver bullet and press a button and we'd be good to go. And unfortunately, as you can see, it hasn't quite worked out that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like about 2015, there's been this promise of automated outbound sales or artificial intelligence in outbound sales, and being able to have super accurate data, right time, right place, right message. And that dream is broken, like more broken than this robot in front of us right now. And I've seen a massive shift on the sales team side to people going back to self-prospecting, people building their own lists, people doing a lot of their own research, people doing a lot of personalization. And whether that's an embrace of, this whole ABM thing, or people are finally realizing, guess what? I'm not going to get the conversion rates I need from all this automation. I need that level of personal touch and personalization to actually hit my number. And I think a lot of people are starting to kind of take the blinders off there and say, automation is great and it will take me so far, but maybe I should leave automation as much as possible to marketers and not salespeople.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point. And as you pointed out here, the kind of last mile, the gap that exists right now. And I know that everyone on the call was hoping to hear an easier answer, but unfortunately, humans still have to be involved. I think that's the bottom line right now. It's almost table stakes to have, that list of vendors in place, in some way, shape, or form, so that you're at least competitive. But and then also, of course, Lead Genius is an awesome solution. Of course, Joe, major shout out to what you guys are doing. But you guys actually integrate some of these ideas as well. But if someone doesn't have a lot of those resources and they're just trying to figure out what should I do with this sucky data that I have, well, thing number one is blocking out some time every day to really focus on this problem of trying to take the information that's in the database and make it useful to you. And so unfortunately, our first 2 bullet points here are, you, the sales rep, or you, the SDR, have to sit down and say, okay, how can I chunk this out and clean the data myself as quickly and efficiently as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I've even seen people hiring their own, virtual assistants to do that for them, or they're bringing on, sales interns to do that. I mean, I think the big thing here is that, having this collection of data sources is great. That's taken us very, very far in the B2B world. But at the end of the day, you need human eyes on the data that's going into your system at the end of the day, before either before it reaches your sales reps, or being able to carve out that time like you're talking about, where a sales rep can actually say, here's my account list, here's my contacts. I'm going to basically proofread the work here and see what the deal is, and not just blindly follow what my team is doing. And then also at the same time, close that feedback loop with marketing and sales leadership and say, hey, these leads are great, or these leads are terrible, and being able to really take that accountability, not only for the leads that are coming their way, but also for their own personal attribution and win rates. What leads am I succeeding with more than anything else? What channel is really helping me hit my quota? And where do those leads come from? How can I get more of those? And then being able to actually ask for that in turn, because you deserve the best data possible. I mean, right now, I know for a fact there are millions of leads being routed all over this country to B2B sales reps, and most of them aren't even being touched because the data is bad. The sales team doesn't trust the data. The sales team doesn't like the data, or doesn't even match the ICP that the company outlined to begin with. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
No, I agree. I mean, I like the point that you made about, throttling, if you're in that position, throttle back the data that doesn't fall into your ICP and the persona that you're trying to hit. I mean, that's almost on the marketing side. I mean, don't let it in if you don't have to. And
yeah,
then to your point, on the sales rep or the SDR side, if you look in and you see something that doesn't fit, it's not your ICP, it's not your lead persona, but somebody entered this list, say something, because I'm sure that they spent a lot of money to get those names and they don't fit in, and it's just wasting your time and muddying up the waters.
yeah, definitely.
And a couple other quick things is, as you mentioned, this is a great internship program, to just give people a project to clean a set of your A accounts and make sure that there's good contact information, at least on like 50 accounts, and give that as a project. Or even I've seen people set up an internal research team to make sure that the SDRs and the sales rep can spend more time actually making contact versus doing this research. And then finally, of course, as you mentioned, Joe, Lead Genius provides, and there's others where you can implement an outsourced team that can take a lot of that burden off, verify the data, make sure that it's in your ICP, and then pipe it back into your system.
Yeah, and I'd say too, I mean, the biggest advantage of having an outsourced team, whether that's Lead Genius, Upwork, or an intern at your own company, is that you can actually find data that you would have had to research yourself as a sales rep, as an SDR, or as an SDR manager. I mean, we're talking about custom data points that move the needle. Like a great example of this is, like Square is one of our biggest clients. We work directly with their BDR team, and we talked to their lead BDR, and we asked him why he's so successful. And he was literally pulling in like the top menu items from Yelp into his email cadence. And he was like, can you pull on that custom data for me? It's like, that's exactly it. Like that's what you and the rest of the sales team needed, was something like that. And that's not a data point you would ever have gotten from a ZoomInfo or DiscoverWorks, because they're just going to give you, phone number, email address, and title, or some
Yeah.
basic things like that. So I think it's also a great opportunity to increase that personalization, increase that customization, and actually, get those conversion rates that you want.
Yeah, you got to speed it up. And to your point, people talk a lot about trigger events. For whatever industry you're in, there's certain trigger events that, if you can get out in front of those or contact people at the right time with the right message, you're going to have a way better chance of setting a meeting, like to your Square example. But for each person, listening, there could be a different trigger event that you need. And like you said, you simply cannot get that from pulling a list off of one of the vendors. It's got to be a deeper level of research.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that we talked about is, how do you sell this to your executives who just look at things from an ROI perspective? Hey, isn't that what the sales rep and SDR are supposed to be doing that research? How do you sell this to them, Joe?
I mean, I would say the argument there is it's a segmentation conversation. I mean, it's really, with standard data sources out there, you're reduced to very broad segments without really the necessary triggers or customization that actually make sales reps successful. So if you're looking at this from a custom data standpoint, and that whether that data is harvested by interns, Upwork, or us, you're actually able to create segments that almost appear personalized because they're so tight, and actually have compelling messaging around that event, but that can be automated at the same time. So you're going to increase volume and velocity, and while getting, the actual reply rates that you want. I mean, everyone wants 20% reply rates, right? So it's yeah, being able to get to those kinds of levels. I mean, like that's what you really need to succeed. And being able to say, hey, I'm going from sending, 20 really good personalized emails a day to creating a custom segment and sending 200 what appear to be personalized emails a day with data points that actually matter and pertain to my ICP without any misses. Like that's the, I think it's fulfilling a promise of AI, but with human beings is
Yeah.
how that goes there.
That's compelling. I mean, I think the best analogy is like Iron Man. You've got the Tony Stark suit, with all the technology and everything, but you still have to have Tony Stark in there. Otherwise, he just Jarvis, goes off the rails. And I think, what you said earlier, we've got all this technology, but it's like that missing part. And from that example that you just gave, I think it should be pretty easy to pitch the ROI for putting a little bit more money into research, because especially right now there's so much spam out there and there's so many people sending mass clueless messages that it's just not working as well as it did even 3 or 4 years ago. We have to up our game or else it's just going to end. So well, good, Joe. Well, I've got one question that came in during our talk was about tracking people that move to different companies in Salesforce. That's a trigger event for one of the people that came in. I had a friend of mine runs a company called SIF Data, SIFDATA. That works on that problem. Do you know of any other vendors out there that could help with that one?
Yeah, Ryan Buckley over at Twofer and Max from Sales Hacker, they created a little thing called Enlisto, which does pretty much the same thing, I think. And yeah, being able to track those job changes as trigger events is hugely important.
It's huge. And be sure, if you plug in another piece of technology, someone's in charge of it and someone knows, how it works and all that stuff.
Yes.
Very good. Well, Joe, thank you so much. I'm sure that folks got a lot of tips on this, on how to get their data a little cleaner. If they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to go about that?
Hit me up on LinkedIn or email me at joe@leadgenius.com. Or if you want to get personal, my personal email address is howtoreachjoe@gmail.com.
Very good. All right, Joe. Well, thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. And we appreciate it. And we'll see you on the next Sales Development Mastermind. Bye-bye.
Take care, David.